Hello, everyone. Welcome to Between Two Worlds, a podcast about belief, unbelief, and everything in between. I'm your host, Scott Trout, here with my co-host,
Joey.
We're very excited to bring a new episode to you today with my good friend here in the Netherlands, James, another Brit. He'll introduce himself. And since we're doing introductions, boys, let's do a little bit of the who we are, what we believe in introduction. I will start. So, hey everyone, I'm Scott. I'm a believer in Jesus who is trying to figure out what is the best evidence I have for my faith.
I'm Joey. I am an agnostic believer, which means there's something out there, but I'm not quite naming it. And I am a believer of today in Subway because I had that for lunch.
Hi, I'm James. I'm a follower of Jesus and I'm trying to do better.
Hopefully Subway gives us a product placement for that one.
Yeah, not sponsored by Subway, but Subway, hit us up.
Maybe one day. Okay, James, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Glad to have you here. Tell us about your story of faith. What did you start with and what changed along the way? What were some of the major moments?
Okay, let's go for it. Interrupt me if you have questions and I'm not being clear. So I was brought up in a household which was Christian, and you have to go back kind of to my grandparents, possibly my great-grandparents, to find people who weren't in that situation, and went to church, well, essentially from the week after I was born, and stuck with that church until I left and went to university. And in some ways, my story of faith is a simple one. I don't know a time when I haven't been able to say that I believe that Jesus died and rose again, and I'm saved through that. So that was kind of my early story of faith. I'd say it's not been a easy road. So kind of in my late teenage years, when I was 18, 19, I had kind of a, why am I a Christian? What's the point of this? Should I walk away from my faith? I kind of spent a good year just looking at why am I a Christian and what's the point? And at that time, one of the big influences on me was this idea within Christianity called apologetics, which is like defending your faith, but not necessarily the theological stuff, but more like what's the evidence? Did Jesus really exist? Is the Bible a fake? Is there any decent archaeology for it? Things like that. And at the end of that year, I was convinced and thought, actually, I think that Christianity is worth it because of the beliefs there in terms of, and what it promotes, I think is good, and the idea of salvation through it was appealing, and also I thought the evidence for it was good. And so I went off to do real life after school at that point, where I worked as a sailor. So I've already said I worked on cruise ships, but before that I worked on container ships, which was a very different challenge with my faith, because you spend months on end working on board these ships in the middle of the ocean where you see 20 people and that's about it, and none of them were Christians, and that was different because it was dealing with my faith while you're on your own, which gave me a greater appreciation for community and just going to church and being with people who think similarly to you and how important that is. I guess, so, and then I ended up here. That's kind of the short story of my faith.
That's really awesome. I'm very curious to hear from you what kind of like experiences you had while defending your faith. What made it solid for you that you were like, yeah, this is what I believe in?
So I think there's a book that I read called The Case for Christ. That was the first book that was the first area I thought, actually, this is it, which kind of step by step goes through what evidence is there for the Bible, how well attested is kind of the Gospels, which they're pretty well attested for that they are an accurate book, and like so does that mean Jesus existed? Almost certainly. And the disciples almost certainly existed. And then things like and then kind of in terms of actual arguments, I guess at university we used to have some good conversations on a Saturday afternoon. Our campus was in the middle of nowhere, so we had nothing better to do than drink and talk about God.
There at university, was it mostly other Christians or non-Christians?
No, it was more. It was. So I went to a maritime academy, and most of the guys there, some of them had faith, some of them didn't. I'd say, not many people were what you would call regularly practicing. So I think it was of the 50 people in my class, only 2 of us went to church every week.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that I find interesting is that you described you had a period in your childhood where you were raised in Christianity, so it's not necessarily like you knew something different, but then what really solidified it for you as your own belief was the fact that you were surrounded in 2 different scenarios at college and then in the sailing business. You're surrounded by people who believe something different than you, and through the conversations with them, that seemed to solidify your own faith. Is that correct?
So ish, I think. So before I went to university was my like crisis point where I'm like, do I really want Jesus? Is Christianity worth it? So I was kind of, by the time I got to university, I knew what I thought, which is probably a good thing. I think university is a place where all sorts of things can be thrown at you, and I kind of knew where I stood by the time I got there. But I think that certainly the time at university and at sea changed my attitudes to certain ways how I act out my faith, especially the like throw yourself into church stuff when you're actually at church, or like if you have an opportunity to do something, do it with the church or with your friends, because it's incredible how much you miss it when you're not there.
Yeah. So what was the crisis moment that you had to go through?
I guess it was just, kind of 17, 18-year-old. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be a teenager again. And you're in so Leicester, the city I grew up in, is pretty unusual as a city in terms of there's no ethnic majority. So I think the stats last time I looked like this: 45% British white, 10% other white, and then 45% everything else. Like you have people from India, the Middle East, coming over from the Caribbean, Africa. So kind of you're exposed to a bit of everything, and also just general teenager dealing with like, what do I do with my life? Oh, alcohol is interesting, girls are interesting, but your faith tells you to do something different. Is it worth it because of that? And it just made kind of a lot of questioning at that point of, what should I believe? Is it worth it or is it not worth it?
Yeah, so Scott and I had a conversation on the weekend about this as well. And I'm very curious to hear, how did you deal with that? And were the moments you did some unchristian-like things?
Did I do unchristian-like things? I don't think I did. I think I was a fairly boring teenager. I was like in a position of, before I jump, I want to know what I think, and then if I do jump, I'll go totally wild, which I didn't. But I kind of, I guess maybe. I think the thing that probably pushed me, there was a girl I fancied. I'm like, do I ask her out? Do I not? Because she has a totally different worldview to me, and like, so is my worldview worth it, or should I go for this girl? And I didn't go for the girl, which is a boring story. But I think that was the bit that like started me on this journey of searching, like, actually, why do I do Jesus?
So
Oh,
James, why do you do Jesus?
Because I think that like I do Jesus because there's obviously the bit that I can't explain, that kind of the stuff there that I think just isn't normally logical. But then there's also the logical things of like the evidence that the Gospels were passed down to us accurately, the evidence that there was a guy called Jesus, the fact that stuff in the Gospels links with the archaeology, that kind of all these issues. And if you want to read more of it, I recommend a book called The Case for Christ as your jumping in point, because that was mine, where you kind of like, oh, this makes sense, and this if this makes sense, and I'm not silly for believing something, I'm not believing something that is made up, or something definitely happened in the first century in Judea.
Scott, I'm gonna throw this to you. Can you write that down so that I can put it in the show notes?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, I've heard it described that as far as Jesus, who Jesus was, it might have been in that book, James, but he was either a madman because he thought he was God and was just like super egomaniac, and the things and the following that he had, people thought he was God. He said he was the son of God. Or he was a liar, specifically trying to get people to follow him when he didn't actually think he
definitely
was.
Like, so we're in one of the small groups at church. We're reading through the book of John, and every chapter we're literally going through it kind of 10-15 verses at a time, and every little section Jesus is essentially saying, I am either divine or the Son of God, or statements that if they were said by someone today would get them locked up in a mental institution.
Yeah. And so then the third option is, or he was who he says he was, and especially because he was willing to die for those claims. So that's like the real test.
And also the guys, I think the other thing that is one of these arguments that is convincing to me is you had the load of disciples, all of which, of the 12 disciples, 11 of them, or 10 of them were killed for their faith. And like these guys, if they didn't see, and again, it's reasonably good historical evidence for this, and you're thinking, if these guys didn't see this, why would they? They had you don't die for something you don't really believe in, I think. So that was one of those arguments that I found convincing at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, same for me. And I think it's Jesus who died for what he believed in, for who he said he was, then his disciples. But it doesn't just stop there, because it would kind of make sense if maybe the first layer were like fanaticals and they're like, we're with it. We're going to die for this. But the fact that people throughout history, you could name any century, and we could find martyrs for the Christian faith in each one of those centuries, people throughout the world who didn't live in the time that Jesus lived, yet believed in him so much so that they were willing to be persecuted, oppressed, thrown in jail for their beliefs, and then ultimately died for it. I've just been reading more about recently, in World War II, and people who are persecuted for their Christian faith. A guy named Bonhoeffer, and stood up against the Third Reich because of what he believed and because he knew who he knew Jesus to be. And so I think that for me is one of the big compelling points to my faith, is the overwhelming amount of people who've been willing to be martyred, killed for their faith.
Yeah. And James, I'm kind of curious, besides being murdered for believing and and showing that belief, what in your eyes is another way to show your faith? That extreme step without dying.
Without doubt, but I think I try to live my faith out. I think by showing, like, being kind and being there for people, and yeah, kind of, if I have a friend in trouble, trying to help them. If I have a friend in trouble, trying to help them, being there. If a friend is upset, generally day to day. Just trying to be decent is why I said at the beginning, trying to do better, because I guess that's like there's very Christianity for me on a day-to-day basis. It's pretty simple. Like, I'm not here to condemn people. I'm here to try to do better by them, and that's often in the small things as well as the big things. And I'm definitely not perfect at that, but I try.
Which makes you human. I mean, everyone tries to do better, and no one is perfect in doing so.
Well, yeah, I think I don't necessarily agree that everyone tries to do better, because I've met enough people who don't. But yeah.
Could name a few myself. Not gonna do that.
Yeah.
James, you've had an experience that I don't know a lot of Christians have had, namely the being on a ship. Well, probably a lot of humans, just like on a ship for 3 months, but specifically trying to maintain your faith in isolation. Can you show us, or bring us into what that was like? What brought you through that? What were some of the struggles that you went through in that period?
So yeah, it's definitely not easy. So there's I guess the first time I went on a ship, I wasn't necessarily prepared for it. So I was on a ship for 4 months, going between Europe and Asia and back. And yeah, my only communication with the outside world was we had emails, and we could send as many emails as we wanted, but they were only allowed to be 1,000 characters long. And my mum managed to crash the email system because she used to send me news every day. And one day she sent me 80 emails and it crashed the email system, which annoyed everyone on the ship. But, that was the year that Leicester won the Premier League. So I was happy. But yeah, so I guess it's the big struggles are like with community, and it's the same. Like, yeah, it's an incredibly lonely place, and you see that with what sailors do with themselves. Sailors drink for a reason. Sailors go to see prostitutes for a reason. What was my favorite? My favorite was the communal porn. That was good fun to try and avoid. But yeah, that was interesting. And yeah, kind of you don't have that structure and just the general friendship that you have when you're ashore. Like, if I'm having a bad day, I can give someone a text. You can't even do that, let alone seeing and catching up and having a coffee with someone just to be sad or to be happy with them or just to be with people. And that's incredibly difficult over time. And certainly I think it changed. I got through it it's very difficult, and I don't think that. I think I learned how to deal with it as I went on. So things like finding the podcasts to listen to, being more regular, reading my Bible and catching up with it, praying more often. But it was a lot of work, and I think definitely there were moments where, like, I know that God was with me and there, and kind of like. So yeah, one example of this, and when you're editing, can you ask me if I want this in the podcast? Because I'm not sure I want this story in the podcast. So we were just outside of Hong Kong, and I'm I think I'd been at sea for 6 months or so. I had like a week at home after 4 months and then back out. And I was just like, I'm incredibly lonely. I can't do this. My friend's going to the whorehouse tomorrow. I'm going to go join him. And I was convinced this was going to happen because I was just done. And I hadn't been listening to my podcasts. I was just feeling totally isolated and out of it. And for whatever reason, I listened to a podcast, and it was I can't even remember what the sermon was, but it was the right sermon at the right time. And it just kicked me out and made me think, no, James, that's not the right thing to do for you or for the people around you. And you've got to, not go to the whorehouse, James. That's a bad thing. Because, Chinese whorehouses, they're not as well regulated as the ones in Amsterdam, that's for sure.
Oh man, yeah, I will definitely ask you if you want this in the podcast or not. We may.
Yeah, that's fine.
We checked the time just now, and I know how to edit this away if needed.
That's cool. Yeah.
Although, James, I appreciate just your honesty, and I think that's a moment of realness where it's just the truth that not everything within Christianity or life is shiny rainbows, and temptation that everyone thinks through: loneliness, isolation. How do I fix this? What can I use to medicate how I'm feeling? Christians aren't immune to that. That's a real thing.
It's been interesting seeing, so obviously we're coming to the end of at least the first lockdown, and how similar that has been in some ways to being on a ship, in terms of you can't see people. And yes, I hope you have a bit more communication and maybe you're zooming a bit more, but there's still that isolation and that loneliness. And I'd say for anyone, especially people who've been living alone during the corona times, that's at least somewhat of the feeling of what it's very similar to being on ship, just not quite as intense, I would say.
Oh man, definitely recognize that feeling of not seeing my friends, not going anywhere, and that type of loneliness and what that does to you. Because I can tell you, the unchristian-like things are happening all the time because you're lonely. Sometimes you're like, okay, maybe I should take a little break from everything and just go for a walk, and that helps a lot.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this brings up an interesting discussion on what is the difference between isolation and solitude, if there is a difference.
Honestly, I would say that solitude is a choice.
Yes.
At least it's to me.
Yes and no. Yeah, and you can feel isolated in a room, but solitude, I think, is where you are walking away from things. You can be at a party and feel like you don't know anyone there and feel like, oh my goodness, this is a little overwhelming. But yeah, solitude is me going for a 17-kilometer walk and looking at cows.
Perfect example. Yeah, for real, because within the Christian faith, solitude is something recommended. It's a helpful part of your faith. It's actually how you get away from the world to actually be with God and experience you are alone with God, and to be okay with that. Whereas isolation, like you're saying, James, like you could be in a room full of people and feel very isolated. I'm not known. I'm not part of this group. No one likes me. What do I do with my hands? And
what are you doing with your hands?
Wow. If it's me, my hands are all over the place. I put them in my pockets. I take them out. I feel sweaty. But I think that's a really necessary part of being a mature human, is being okay with being alone. Because I think most people run away from that at all costs. That's why they fill their life with noise, with technology, with alerts, notifications, shows. It's like anything to drown out the silence or the feeling that I'm alone. So I talk to people, or I call people, or I check Facebook, or I watch these shows. And I think it's a necessary discovery to confront why is isolation or loneliness so scary.
Are you calling me out? I feel called out.
Joey, did I just describe you?
Yeah, that's totally
I wasn't
me
meaning to.
right now.
But I mean, Joe, I think we've talked about this a little bit. Remember that time when us as a Navigator community did like a fast from social media? And it's because in a small way, for a week, we were trying to confront that in each one of us. Why do we fill our life with all this noise? So it was not necessarily, I think
No,
everyone struggles with that.
I'm joking. I feel like, especially during the Corona time, everyone's doing that on purpose, like throwing on as much notifications as you can for that type of contact. And because of your media fest, I did the opposite. I turned away as many notifications as possible, which helped a lot, especially if you're doing your solitude forest walk. You don't want the phone to be ringing all the time.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, exactly. So James, give us a picture of where you're at now with your faith. What are you currently looking into?
Where am I at now? I guess I am still. I am assured in my faith, so I don't. Those doubts that I had maybe however many years ago I was 18 are not there. I think I'm in a good place with a good community at the moment, which is great, which helps a lot. And I'm kind of re-examining myself at the moment and saying, where could I be doing better? So again, for instance, so we were looking at John with my church's small group, and like a theme that has come up again and again in the last few chapters is Jesus keeps on saying he doesn't come to condemn, he comes to save. And I'm thinking, oh, I knew that, but am I consciously acting on that? And am I condemning people in my life? Am I kind of, or am I not showing a heart of love to people in life? And kind of, I'm trying to be more conscious with that at the moment, because I know it's definitely something that is very easy to fall into. It's the stereotype, isn't it? The harsh Christian who tells you off for everything you do. I'm trying to think, am I doing that in my life with people around me?
Do you? Do you have certain things that you see and that you're like, ooh, I'm not agreeing with that at all?
I do. There are things that I see and I think I'm not agreeing with that at all. But then I'm trying to consciously then not react in a way that then is it's always a difficult one, like where to condemn and where not to condemn, because there are certain things that we all agree are just wrong. Like if someone at work is lying to me, I'm going to call them out for lying.
Yeah,
because they're lying at work or whatever. But I think it's kind of it's interesting looking through John. Jesus quite often just holds up a mirror to people and says, you're doing this, and then says nothing more. And then people tend to work it out themselves or don't. Because 9 out of 10 times, most of us believe the same thing, I think, about most morality.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. If someone's lying, but also for the more extreme cases, if I see someone doing cocaine, I'm not gonna be like, "Hey, that's a good thing. keep on going, buddy." I'm also gonna you're gonna be judging them nonetheless.
You're going to be judging them, but I'm not going to. I don't know. I don't have any. Again, at university I did, but here in Amsterdam less so. Like at university, I give you an example at university where I think I probably acted right. Like I had friends who used to do what in the UK were called illegal highs, which was essentially an illegal drug where they changed slightly the chemical composition so it is now legal. And this kept on going and changing until the government finally changed the law. And I would always like, you sure about that? Okay, they go off and smoke, and then leave them to it. And then I guess, kind of, you don't actively not actively going out of my way to kind of force myself upon them. And they're aware that I'm not going to be around them when they do it, and they respect that. And when things went wrong with it, and there were a few bad trips where people had to be driven home and reassured that they weren't dying. They just like being the person who's there for people, and not trying not to isolate people. Try not to push people away. Which sometimes you succeed in and sometimes you don't.
Yeah, that was my question. Is judgment bad? Is it a bad thing? Joe, you can answer too if you have a thought.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about it because I think yes and no. I think you should always find that line, but that line is not always very clear. Like, I know a lot of people that really deserve to be judged, but I think you don't always have to judge them right in their face about stuff.
Yeah, you judge them behind their face to other people?
Trust me and my friends do that a lot. I'm guilty of that. No, but
so carry on, Joey. Carry on.
So what I wanted to say is that we judge them, but we also kind of accept that they are who they are. So you don't attack someone's image. It's not like we're burning them completely down, but we're discussing what people are doing. For example, I know a good friend who has a friend who does a lot of sex with a lot of different people, sometimes married people. And we definitely have a very strong opinion about that. Like, that's a no-go. But this is still a friend. She's still good to my friend. So we're not burning her down. We're just trying ever so slightly to be like, hey, is this the best decision you can make right now? And after that, it's up to them. So I feel like judgment can be both right in their face and also be just a little bit behind them, as long as it's not like very big gossip.
I guess I've got a friend who kind of autumn last year was making decisions that I was not sure about their relationships. And it's similar to you. I was kind of like, okay, cool, I'll be there for them and they can do what they want. And then I thought it wasn't necessarily a good idea what they were doing, but I stand by them, be there for them through the good and the bad, and not be that face of kind of judgment there. I think there is a difference in how I would act with someone who was a believer and not a believer. That is the one thing I would say. Because again, the Bible study we're doing, it's interesting how Jesus treats the Pharisees, the religious leaders at the time. He's very blunt with them and very much like, you should know this is the law. And you're breaking it, as opposed to the people who weren't Jews or weren't necessarily believers, and Jesus was a lot more kind of just being the mirror to them. And I found that's an interesting thing that I've been looking and trying to wrestle with recently.
Yeah, and to add on that, I think a big thing as well, if you know you're doing something bad, because that's something we see as well with that friend, is that this woman complains a lot about the situation. Only if you're actively doing something bad, you deserve some judgment, because that judgment will also come from a good place. So if you're complaining like, oh, this person is not talking to me, but you already know this person is in a relationship, then you actively complain about something that you can change yourself. So
I think I think what I tend to do is just ask questions, and quite often in asking questions, when you're talking to people, they change their minds on things. So I had a friend who was had a massive argument the other week, and I could kind of see the point of the argument from the other person's side. So you're just asking tactful questions to try and hopefully get them to see something from a different direction, without necessarily, putting them in a position where they feel uncomfortable with you, which is difficult.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, James, your tact versus my just like, I'm going to say whatever's up here in my brain. Could be a little difference between the old British and English, or British and American.
Yeah, we
side
did
of-
some, me and Scott did some dishwashing, where we go around dishwashing and talking about Jesus to people. And Scott was happy to talk there for hours, and I was kind of like, 5 minutes. Okay, we've imposed upon you enough. Let's leave. Yeah, me and Scott are very opposite there.
Oh, it was quite nice to have the two dynamics just melding together. Man. Well, this is Joey's usual question. Joey, do you know which one I'm going to say?
Yeah, I know what you're gonna say. So James,
Do you want to do it?
yeah, I'm gonna do it.
All
James, I always end the podcast with this type of question. So if today was your last day, what is the message that you are gonna leave behind for everyone to hear?
Can we start the next episode with my answer?
Sadly, no.
Okay. What would I like? Yeah. Jesus came down to earth to save. Have a look into him, and if you won't believe, because through him you can have eternal life, or something cheesy like that.
Dude, that's an awesome message if you ask me.
Yeah, for real. Especially the look into it. I think it's important.
Yeah.
James, you can always have an addendum in the next episode if you'd like to have
Okay.
Yeah.
an addendum. Great. James, that is part 1 of our podcast with James. Thanks for being here. You all have been listening to Between Two Worlds, a podcast about belief, unbelief, and everything in between. Stick around for the next episode as we jump into a little bit more with James of what we've been brought up, or maybe something completely different, as is often the case with me. No one knows, not even me. So see ya in the next episode.
Bye.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Let us know what you thought of this video. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or turn on notifications, or check out our Patreon page, or our social media, or do all of them. We're a podcast, so wherever you get your podcasts, give us a listen, whether you're doing the dishes or pooping or walking the dog. We'd love to be there with you. Finally, if you like this video, check out these videos.